Welcome, everybody, to the KMCDC monthly meeting. Today, we are very excited to welcome John Hovell and Donita, who I can't pronounce your last name. I'm so disgraced. I'm sorry, Donita.
Volkwijn.
Volkwijn.
Beautiful.
Well, oh, great. Well, thank you so much. We're going to be talking about conversational leadership, which is just has been all over the place. And I know it's going to be a great session to tell us how a knowledge manager could use that in their toolkit. So let me hand it over to John and Donita.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us here. And I love that it's a nice little cozy group too, because then we can start to dig in a little bit to the advantages of conversational leadership. So just a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. I am the manager of knowledge management at Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, which is a consultancy firm to nonprofits. We're also a nonprofit in the New York area. And as I mentioned to those who were on a little bit earlier, about 3 years ago, I don't remember, time has lost all meaning, but I took a knowledge course with John, and it just really set me on this path. And then about a year ago, 2 years ago, we started talking about conversational leadership that John and David Gertine had created between the two of them, sort of as the next frontier, and also in conjunction with all of the other frontiers that are already, come from knowledge management. And so John and I did my inaugural workshop last August. John has done the first one with David and the second one with me, and we're doing the third one in April. And so, usually people would want to start with slides or a presentation or something like that. And I thought, well, if it's conversational leadership and it's an hour, we should be conversing. So I'd love to start off with not conversing, first of all, by asking you all to think back to when the last time was you had a conversation that made you feel something. In what context was that conversation? Was it at home? Was it at work? Did it bring you joy? Did it bring you rage? Did it bring you information, enlightenment? How often do you have these conversations that mean something to you? So as you're thinking, I need to think about it a little bit too. Think about that time, and we were going to have you put like the date of that last conversation in your name, but I think because we're such a small group, if people are willing to share the date of that last conversation that moved them, that would be great. So take another minute. We'll be quiet. I'm not sure if that was a minute because I forgot to put on the timer, but does anybody need more time? You're good? Okay. Ooh, Liz, thank you for volunteering there. So in thinking about that conversation, if for all of you, if you're willing to share in the group, what was it about the conversation, not the content of it, but was it a planned conversation? Was it something that was just happenstance? If it was a good conversation, what made it good? If it was a conversation that was challenging, what made it challenging? And if we can just have a couple of people speak to that if they're willing.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thanks, Victor.
Victor again, but
Yeah.
mine was 2 days ago and definitely challenging, but ended good. And the conversation was one of our exploratory ones that we often do, but we got to a point to where we were misunderstanding our points, and we thought we were going opposite ways, and so the drilling down and asking about that got for me a little personal, because it was more revealing on things that I wasn't communicating well. And so I had to put the brakes on for my communication style and shift gears, and then communicate more to try and show that I'm trying to focus in on that, to help out better. And that took a while in the conversation to come through. It was shifting gears from what we were talking about, and now saying, in order to get to that, we're going to have to solve this first. But once we committed to it, I think it helped out, and then changed the whole conversation once we were back on the same wavelength. So it was some effort, but put it in, and for me, I had to push through it because it seemed like it was all focused about my personal style.
Thank you so much. I feel like we could just, like, that's the entire session right there. We're good, because I loved every single thing that you said, Victor. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Anybody else like to share?
I'll share. Oh, go ahead, Emily.
No, please, Kay, you go first.
Okay. It's really quick. So I think this week in training, I've given John a bit of a hard time. So I've been kind of like, help me make sense of this, and I need it to make sense. And where are the pieces? And I need all the pieces of the puzzle. And today we had Jamie come in and speak during our class, and I think I asked a question about knowledge retention, and she, kind of explained that and gave some good tips on that. And what resonated with me is she said, don't start anything until you find out how to help solve the problems. So to have that conversation first. And I was like, oh, light bulb. I've been trying to go back, trying to figure out how am I going to go back to work and be able to do all of these things that everyone wants me to do and make it all better. And because they've been waiting for me to come on board for months and months and months, and now I'm here, and how do I make this better for everybody really quick? So that made a lot of sense. And I kind of was able to step back and say, okay, I just need to ask them what their problems are. How can I help? And I just need to start there. And that brought it all together for me. So that was really helpful, really, really helpful.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, I've had a whole series actually over the last 2 weeks, and part of what happened is they started pretty tough, actually. It's sort of with a core group of people, and we're trying to do something at work, and it's just been hard. And the front end of it was hard because a lot of people coming in with a lot of different kinds of ideas about what it was we were actually trying to accomplish. And about a week and a half ago, we finally all hit the moment. We're like, oh, yes, we all agree that's the thing. And so today the meeting was just so much fun because it was everybody being able to sort of build on top of each other. So not talk over each other or pile in, but actually say, oh yeah, what about this on top? And it was just really fun to have everybody feel like they were pulling in the same direction.
Fantastic. We have time for one more.
I was going to share one really quick. I'm
Yeah,
trying
please.
to teach this class this week, and there's this student giving me a really hard time. No, not at all. But yeah, really quickly, I would share that one of the things we did, for those of you that have been through the CKM class, today we did the debate, whether it's, is KM all about technology or is KM all about people? And Donita, really, again, it's learned from you. I didn't even really have the simple words for this, but every single time during that debate, I get sweaty every single time. And that's Donita language. That's stolen straight from Donita. And it happened again today. And you know what? I love it. It's just great to go on mute and watch the facilitator steps aside and the group can have this conversation. And Kay, what it really was today, there was a moment where one of the people started like, debating. I think he was on It's All About People side, but the path he started his debate point on started to sound racist to me, quite frankly. I was like, where is he taking this? Hold on. Like I was ready to mute him and come, and he like cleaned it up. But that was like immediate
Sweat.
Like, oh, good. I get to now go into OD mode and get out of KM mode, but it was fine. I actually wonder if Kay noticed it or felt it too, because there was a little tingle that I felt.
There was, yes.
Okay, good. Glad it wasn't just me.
No.
But I think it worked out. So yeah, I felt something today.
Yeah. So, in my version of KM, it's our 3 pillars, or 4, depending on which school of thought you're coming from, the people, process, technology. I'm fully and firmly ensconced in they are all valuable, but technology and process are in service of people, because process and technology are agnostic. They don't do anything except what you tell them to do. And so it's people who can make brilliant things happen with process and technology. And they're also what can just all of the spanners in the work all of the time. So as a knowledge manager, you have to have a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and you have to respect and honor all of the people in all of the conversations. And if you're a more linear thinker, you have to try hard with the program side. And if you're more of a circuitous thinker, talking to IT is a lot, right? So we have a couple of frameworks. John and David have created one. John and I have created one, and it boils down to the fact that in acknowledging what sort of tools you have in a conversation, it really helps. So like the top 4 that we have, I'm going to forget one because apparently I can only keep 3 things in my mind at the same time. But if you're thinking about the purpose of your conversation, the context, the design, and the
Enablers.
There
you go.
Thanks, John. It's a different one that I forget every single time, just for the record. So if you think about the purpose of your conversation, Emily, for example, in your conversation with your people, if you had determined what sort of conversation you were having in the very first meeting, was it a brainstorming meeting? Was it a consensus building meeting? Was it a knowledge transfer meeting? What kind of meeting was it? And then had been able to communicate that with the rest of the team, going in saying, hey, this one's a brainstorm, you guys. It changes where you think about like which part of your brain you're going to have to access. Because if you're expecting a knowledge transfer meeting and you come into a brainstorm meeting, you get crabby. You do. And you're like, this is not what I was prepared for. I have notes. I did my research, right? And now you're just asking me to like think of stuff in my brain. That's dumb. So as a leader, you can use the tools of the conversation to think about what is the context of this meeting. I'm going to send it over to John in a minute, but the bane of my existence for the past 2.5 years has been our CRM. PTSD. Oh, I should not joke about that. I'm so sorry, but it is something that has changed relationships in our organization. It has damaged relationships in our organization. And I think about 50% of that would have been alleviated if we had started with a systems architect. If we'd had a conversation with somebody who could have a conversation with us and say, what do you want this system to do? Don't tell me what you want it to look like, or any of that business. What do you want it to do? And then have that conversation with the architect, who can then start to envision something. That would have saved us at least a year of building. It would have saved some relationships. It would have done, so just considering if you've got the right people in the room for the conversation that you're planning to have. Is your systems architect there? Is your end user there? Is the IT person who's going to make it all happen there? And do we have to have a very long conversation that might take weeks or months before we come to consensus? If that saves us a year and a half on the end, is that first conversation worth it? So that's just a little teaser. John, I'm gonna head it off to you.
Sure, thank
So I want to
you.
have people have a chance to chat.
Love it as always. Yeah, we call it the egg model that Donita and I worked so hard to draw together. So yeah, around the outside, it's got context, purpose, enablers, and design, and there's all kinds of details underneath them. And then in the center of that model that really keeps the egg rolling forward in an awkward kind of roll is self and community ship. So I think it's probably worth just 30 seconds on each. The idea of self comes from that notion of use of self, for those that are familiar with it. There's so much in use of self that I was thinking, I actually kind of want to do a quick vote here in chat, not yet, but I could spend 10 or 15 minutes just talking about use of self. In 30 seconds, I would basically say, just like a musician plays an instrument, a trumpet player plays a trumpet, and you have to learn everything about the physical trumpet. In OD and in KM, and definitely in conversational leadership, your body is the instrument. So learning yourself, your emotions, your feelings, your sensations, your thoughts, your patterns, everything that's self. It's like presence, but so not presence. It's even more awareness than that. So that's the self part of the model. And then the other part that keeps it rolling is community ship. And the notion of community ship, oversimplified, is, unfortunately, this word leadership has been hijacked to pretty much mean command and control, divide and conquer, yell and tell, whatever catchphrase you're used to, what we would, I think, in this group call traditional leadership, or limited leadership, or dictatorial, authoritarian leadership. Unfortunately, like most organizations and most places around the world, when you talk about leadership, that's what it means. And yet I think all of us in this room would say, that's not what I mean by leadership. I mean shared, step in, step out. I lead, you lead, let's co-lead, let's see what emerges. The word leadership has kind of been burned. So Henry Mintzberg has created a new word, community ship. And it's basically a new word trying to catch on that means shared leadership. It's a new label for my hunch as to what all of you think when you think about what leadership is. So that's when Donita talked about the 4 parts of the model. There you go. Now you've heard in a few minutes the entire model that, yeah, we've done a lot of work and a lot of practice trying to figure out what are those pieces. But here's what I would love to do now for 10, maybe 15 minutes is use of self. So let me do it this way. In knowledge management, all of us know, right, that there are dozens and hundreds of techniques: communities of practice, knowledge cafe, network analysis, expertise location. We could all go on and on and on with lots and lots of tools and approaches inside KM. The same thing is now building. It's been about 5 years. David and I probably need to really look, and there's probably like a 5-year anniversary coming up, which would be kind of fun. The toolkit is really growing in conversational leadership. I wish we could, talk all night and I would give you all of them, but for just a few minutes, I'd love to just vote. I'll give you 2 that I happen to really, really love, that I find foundational. So it'd be like, the metaphor to KM would be like, do you want to learn about expertise location or communities of practice? Because we can talk about one of them. They're both huge. They're both amazing. We can talk about others later or something. So the 2 that I would love to offer is use of self, the one I just briefly mentioned. What models can we offer you to understand self better? Or another one I would love to share, which I think is really, really core, is Dr. Ed Schein and his son, Peter Schein, have written a book called Humble Inquiry. And in fact, they just came out with a new version, I think this week, like a second edition of the book. There's a few models in that book, but one of them is called The 4 Levels of Conversation. So I'm thinking maybe just put in chat a quick vote. Would you rather hear about use of self, or would you rather hear about 4 levels of conversation? And then I'll share those and we'll chat about those for a few minutes. I guess we'll use good old majority vote.
They're both awesome.
They're both great. Yeah. I can send you links for the other stuff if you're interested. All right, we got an early lead for 4 levels. Oh, look at this. Wow. Almost unanimous. Is that majority already? First 4 votes? I'll pause for a second unless there's a...
I'm technically unable to get to my chat because I'm using my phone. So I'm going to relinquish my vote and go with whatever everybody else wants.
All right. It looks like quite a few votes for 4 levels of conversation. Okay, so I have a visual I could show you, but let me see if I can just kind of talk to it. I'm following Donita's lead here. So 4 levels according to...
We're all lost.
Dr. Ed Schein and Peter Schein. Okay, so 4 levels. Think about, like Donita did at the open, think about any conversation you've ever had. The research, their belief and their research says something like 90%, some high percentage of your conversations are held at either level -1, they call it, which is a bit provocative. -1, that sounds scary. There is no level 0, and then there's level 1. So level -1 and level 1, that's the vast majority of any person's conversation. Very few conversations ever in anyone's life are held at level 2 or level 3. So I give like the numbers there just to kind of give you a comparison across these levels. So what are the 4 levels? Level -1, I want to use their exact words: total impersonal domination and coercion. Now they purposefully word it quite strongly, but if you actually think about many of the transactional conversations you're in, and you look at the patterns of what's being said and how the conversation is going, I would say most project status meetings are level -1. They're, did you do this? Is it done? Why didn't you do it this way? It's said much more politely and professional and skilled than that, but that's actually the message. You did it wrong, go back and do it right. At least that was my experience. So that's -1. Now, let's talk about level 1. It's a little easier to talk about. This is really where I think I spent a lot of professional time. Transactional and role-based, and then in air quotes, they call it professional conversations. So this is literally the transactional. Do you want to go watch a movie tonight, or do you want to have a drink? Do you want to go to this meeting here, or do you want to take care of the kids? Right, like choices and transactions and decisions, that kind of, I'm in a role, you're in a role. I'm not quite being my full self. I've got a little bit of a mask because I'm either the decision maker in this meeting, or I'm a contributor in this meeting, or I'm the facilitator and designer of this meeting. I've got a role in this meeting. Again, let's talk about implicit knowledge since we're all KMers. The implicit side of probably never spoken, but we've each got a role here. So you can kind of guess where this is headed. We're beginning to take off masks. We're beginning to speak to the role that I'm playing in this conversation and the role that I think you're playing in this conversation. It starts to get more and more sensitive as you get to level 2 and level 3. So they call level 2 personal, cooperative, trusting relationships. I like to hijack it a little bit and call it emotional conversations. Now, what I mean by emotional, 2 things. 1, you are free to yell, you are free to cry, you are free to get irritated. And so not only can you express emotion, and it is allowed in this conversation, you can use the words to speak to it as well. If I were to practice it right now, Donita, I feel a bit nervous. I think I want to impress this group. I don't know if what I'm saying is making sense or of value. I'm trying to read faces, right? So that's me, honestly, with my sweaty palms, beginning to practice, like trying to aim for level 2 conversations. So let me just keep going, and then I want to give like a wrap up of the whole 4 levels too. So emotional conversations are what they call personal, cooperative, trusting relationships. Am I free to feel my full range of emotions, my full range of thoughts, or am I playing a role? That's the big difference between level 1, level 2. Level 3, they call it emotionally intimate with total mutual commitment. That's what they call level 3. David and I have labeled it a little differently, and we've had some pushback on this label, but for now we still use it. We call them soulful conversations. The other word, the label we're thinking about using is identity-based conversations. So what do I mean by that? In a level 2 conversation, I can talk about my emotions, I can feel I can show my emotions, and we can, work through it and speak like that. Level 3, because I've had so many level 2 conversations, I've started to pick up my own patterns. Wow, I get irritated every time I have this kind of conversation. I get joyful every time I have this conversation. Now in level 3, I want to talk about my patterns. It's not only this moment I feel joyful, irritated, happy, sad, angry, whatever it is. It's, and this is also true about me. Over the last 6 to 8 weeks, I've had a really bad headache. What is that about? There's something going on for me that is related to how I'm viewing the world, how the world is impacting me. I think I'm ready to have a level 3 conversation, whether it's with a psychiatrist, therapist, best friend, family, right? Like, I'm ready to enter into level 3 soulful identity-based conversation. But also notice intimate and total mutual. What makes level 3 fundamentally different from level 2? Not only am I entering into an identity level conversation, so are you. It's not a one-way identity-based conversation. That's where, what people would over generalize and oversimplify it to? Deep. It's a deep conversation. What's fascinating, David and I have found, if you go Google and look up like PhD level research on deep conversations, there's no such thing. No one's ever unpacked what is a deep conversation. It's not out there. We haven't found it. Try and help us find it. This model is about as close as we have found to what is a deep conversation. So now my last little pretty bow or framing to put around the whole thing is, I hope I'm not sounding like I only in my life want to have level 3 conversations, as if level 2, level 1, and level -1 are a failure. It's not what the model is saying. The model is saying most of us only ever have the range of level -1 and level 2 or level 1. We very rarely go into emotional or identity, soulful based conversations. It is a healthy coping mechanism to have -1 or more level 1 conversations. There are times where you need to talk about the weather and sports and the movie you watched last weekend. There are reasons for those kinds of conversations. We just wouldn't want people to live a life and not even realize that there's a broader range of conversations that can be held when the time and place is appropriate for that kind of moment. So that is the 4 levels of conversation. Donita and I were thinking we would do breakouts to talk about it, but Donita, I'm kind of thinking maybe we just stay as a full group. Is that thinking the same? Or should we split
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
I've gotten very fond of this group already, and I
Okay.
would hate to be separated from a certain portion of them.
Okay. Which portion am I in, the good side or the bad?
So John,
Well,
I have
and-
a question for you.
Please.
So if I'm an active listener and I practice critical thinking, which means I'm a thinking partner with people. Why do I worry about the 4 levels?
So I love critical thinking. I got to tell you, every time I hear critical thinking, right away, my brain goes to critical feeling. So like getting out of my intellectual patterns and getting into my, what is causing me to want to be so intellectual? I'm a deep listener. I'm thinking, great. What's the value of thinking? Dr. Tara Brach says it beautifully. Intellectual conversations are great for solving problems and brainstorming and being up in my head. Fantastic. That's usually that part of your brain and that part of your body. There's something like, I don't know, 90% of our brain is about seeing the saber-toothed tiger, fight, flight, freeze, solve the problem. Of course, today there's a lot less saber-toothed tigers, and now it's more like, can I do this in SharePoint or not? Right? And like intellectually solving the problem. Dr. Tara Brach has this quote that has stuck with me for a long time. Who am I if there's nothing wrong with me? It's a really powerful quote. That to me gets out of the critical thinking, deep listening, and into this moment exists. I'm here, you're here. There's nothing to solve. I don't need to impress anyone. Am I going the right direction or no?
Well, I sense that your take on critical thinking is somewhat on the negative side. And I would argue a critical thinker is somebody who understands the polarity of a situation, meaning the positives and the negatives, and you can fully engage that with someone. That to me is critical thinking. It's not being analytical to the negative point. So
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, we all know people, we all have thinking partners. That it becomes a critical thinking engagement. So
yeah, it's fair for sure. I guess since we just talked about the 4 levels, it'd be kind of fun to explore just for a second a thinking partner, critical thinking practice, pros and cons, polarities, advantages, disadvantages. In what ways could a critical thinking conversation be an emotional conversation, be in a level 2 personal conversation? I'm sure there's a way. I don't know exactly how to word that, but it probably goes with the model.
So I think I've had quite a few of those kind of conversations, especially given the transitions in political climate and things like that. I think there's quite a few conversations that involve critical thinking, but also heavy emotions and feelings about things. And how do you navigate through conversations where maybe people intellectually disagree on things, but then that really stirs emotions and you're trying to stay in conversation with someone. So you're still trying to people are explaining why they believe things and they're intellectualizing things. But as they're intellectualizing things, they're also really revealing that there's a lot of emotion carried with those conversations. And, those are hard to navigate. And I thought, kind of backing up a little bit today, in the CKM class, the first question you asked me to answer was, what do you do about people who don't want to share? It's such a great question and very much applicable to like what Ivan was saying and what we're talking about here, because, it's not a simple question to answer. There's no simple answer to understanding why people don't want to share information. It might seem simple on the surface, but really, I feel like those are the situations where you need to approach with the most caution, because on the one hand, it might be a bigger level problem, a cultural problem, but on the other hand, it might really be a personal problem. It might be, I am terrified of losing my space, my place, my income, things like at that level. So for knowledge managers, I think how the 4 levels of conversation could be helpful to you is really being conscious of the fact that, there is more to what people might be feeling and thinking in the intellectual thought partner conversations that you might have. And that as a knowledge manager, you kind of have to navigate those and learn when to get out of them and then when to keep maybe going a little bit. And that's such a hard skill, I think, to develop. But it's something worth really like practicing and understanding.
I'll also say, you know, John, your mentioning of patterns reminded me of Victor's sharing in where he was starting to recognize some of his own patterns in, like, when this happens, I tend to do this and I'm not getting anywhere doing this. So if I need to take a step back and sort of understand the situation from a different lens and then show up differently, then I go maybe from a level 1 to a conversation to level 2 conversation. The other part of it also is, you know, Ivan, I love thinking. I love trying to figure out the wheres and the why fors, right? But I think there's also like a critical feeling thing that comes from there, which is, I wonder if critical thinking and critical feeling together are level 1 or level 2 or 2 or 3. What also came to mind is that, you know, we have just passed the 500,000 mark for people who have died from COVID in this country. Where a lot of us are working from home. That line between professional and personal has been blurred to the point of like almost non-existent, right? And so whether or not we want to, we are starting to find ourselves pushing on into level 2, level 3 conversations, because the reason that I can't focus on what box to program into the CRM is because I have a friend who's fighting for her life. You know, a lot of times organizations deal with 1 or 2 maybe instances of severe grief or severe illness within the organization. And you can sort of absorb that because people have their friends in the organization that can sort of hold that emotional burden. But when you're talking 5, 6, 7 people in a 50-person organization or a 5,000 in a 60,000 person organization, it starts to impact at a level that is going to get into regular old -1 dominant things, because people are on edge. The other factor that comes into there also is the conversation of race in this country right now. We are dealing with dual crises at the same time with different implications. People's amygdalas are hijacking them all over the place. We're all on like paper thin shelves of health, physical, mental, emotional, right? So I enjoy working out the details of an issue, like why is this person like coming to me in this respect? But I also think that preparing for those other conversations is also something that is going to, as knowledge managers, often we are the connective tissue of the organization. We translate from the IT language into non-IT language. We translate from HR into finance. We translate all of these things. And so we have our little feelers out about how to talk to one person or another, right? I just realized I got on a diatribe. I'm off my diatribe, off my soapbox. Please, continue to talk, but there you go.
I can pick up on my thoughts around what John described about the 4 levels of conversation, and it actually had me reflect on sort of where I'm now and where I was before, and specifically between sort of a large corporate environment, which was oscillating very much between -1 and 1, very much 1 on a team level, and then -1 every time you stepped into the room or a conference call with a senior manager or executive. And it was, and at times to a toxic degree, right? Which was a burden on everybody. Reading also the description and on these, more self and emotional levels in 2 and 3, I must say probably one thing that makes, or that has drawn me to the agile world, is that a lot of the concepts in agile are more about conversations, first of all, right? So, and Donita, you talked earlier about leadership, and the term in the agile world is servant leadership, right? As a really real counterpoint to the traditional leadership that we find in -1, and then also from a conversational standpoint in general, the whole concept of how you approach an agile project is that change is part of the model, and by facilitating a lot of conversations, you make it relevant and you make it work and you make it valuable. And that's what I really like about it, right? I must say, in the current environment that I'm at, because I thought about it, yes, there are obviously your normal level 1 conversations as well, but I must say that I have currently an incredible amount of level 2 conversations because the whole agile concept is not just sort of lip service, but is really supported by all levels of the organization. And even if we have meetings with program leadership, they are cooperative and they are trusting, and there is usually a very constructive solution approach that is permeating a meeting, and it's not about who has the most power. So that resonated quite a bit with me.
One of the things I've really been reflecting on is the idea of sort of, how do you earn a level 2 conversation, right? How do you earn a level 3 conversation? Because you don't get that right out of the gate. And I've been in several interactions. I sit in knowledge management, but international development, and care focuses a lot on women and girls. And we've had a whole string of conversations over the last year about, well, in that survey, GBV didn't come up. Why didn't the women tell us? And it was like, well, because we haven't earned it yet, right? Like, that's not a thing that women are just gonna put on the table. If they don't know you, they don't, if you send a new enumerator out, whatever. But and sometimes even inside the organization, there's real disappointment. Like, I don't think that person went deep. I don't think that person gave me their emotions in this conversation today. And it's like, well, maybe that's not the headspace they're in today. And so, like, how do you build the community and build the relationship so that you can have them, but also give people the space to say, you know what, today I need to be at level 1. Like, I got too many other things happening. And like, we have a relationship where level 2 is possible, but it's not going to be today.
Beautiful.
I was thinking about how now we're in a place where often our conversations take place over emails, and that is not a great medium for communicating, meaning two-way conversation. And I've just been thinking about how I have had some conversations that basically probably were -2, where people were just like they start off with the blame, or, and like, and they're higher than me, so I have to, kind of respect that. But of course, and what that does is it not only is upsetting, but it also cuts off the conversation, and suddenly I don't want to respond, or I want to go to my boss and have her. So I'm thinking there's some people who only communicate at level -1, and that's their default. And if you know people like that, it's so toxic. And I think it's worth recognizing that, because I think it can really affect you negatively, because I think that most people, you want to work at a level 1 where you're, you want to get things done, you want to work well with people, you do what you can, and hopefully you can develop that trust. And unfortunately, in this time, we're not seeing people in person right now, so we're communicating in this kind of just a film, a technical film in front of us, and often it's just text, and that's the worst way to communicate, or get communicated to in the -1. So that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, how could I don't think the person who I'm thinking of actually would listen to me and say, that's very destructive, but that's kind of his way. That's how he works, and that's just something that you have to deal with. But it does raise some difficulties for conversations, to basically have the conversation that's two-way. So so that -1 thing, I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is.
I was thinking that, Tara, what you're saying is actually pretty, in my brain, it's connecting with what Emily was saying about, in your case, Tara, diving straight into the level 2 conversation with someone. You don't need to say, I'm level 2, you're level 1, right? You don't do that, but it would be, the way I receive your commands is toxic, right? You're like sharing now. Toxic really isn't an emotion. So there could be all kinds of practice around, what does toxic feel like? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it fear of like, what is that? And so now you're offering a level 2 conversation. You're beginning it, which is scary and difficult. And to Emily's point, not today. Right? Like, maybe today is not my day, and you know what? Maybe my day is never coming. So I'm tying the two of those together.
Yeah.
And then I'm also like, I'm looking at Ivan. Looks like Ivan's about to speak.
I have a very interesting perspective on this. At the Defense Acquisition University, I'm in the executive department. So we bring in the senior most level people. We do learning and training. And now that we switched all our courses online, there's a backlash because the faculty members, which I am one, complain that I'm used to reacting to body language when I teach. Hold that thought. And they want to go back to face-to-face versus virtual. And I argue that when you go virtual, you need to listen better, listen deeper. It's a whole hyper focus on listening, and you can hear as much as you can when you see something. It's a different level of reading somebody. I think body language is more emotional when you watch it and react to it versus listening, because there's a lot of tonal things going on and you can feel fear and all that. And people aren't used to listening hard because we're so visually oriented. So somehow in that, whatever I just said, fits into a couple of those layers there.
I was also thinking, thanks, Ivan, because we had an interesting discussion. I'm a co-founder of a group that is for BIPOC members of the philanthropy and nonprofit and adjacent groups, and we've had to go virtual. We used to meet once every 2 months in the before times. And people are very excited to get back into seeing each other personally, but there's a very large contingent that also wants to keep virtual meetings going because it allows for a different kind of interaction. It allows parents to be with their children when they're on the meet, et cetera, et cetera. But I was going to also talk to Tara's point, because part of the thing about the use of self is also kind of looking at yourself and your uses, because as you have found out, I am a relatively verbose human being, and I tend to I need to take things away and think about them and noodle through them, and sometimes I iterate out loud. And I wonder if we sometimes at that level think that we are receiving 1 and -1 conversations when actually we're receiving 1 or 2 level conversations, because I think John knows this story, and Jamie might too. Our COO had the opportunity to bring in hazelnut flavored coffee pods, and he wrote to about 12 of us who are coffee lovers to say, is this something that you would like? And I wrote back a paragraph of, well, I think it's an abomination. I think it's gross. If you want to do that, that's your choice, because I'm not going to be the person who's going to tell you what you can and cannot put in your body. As long as you sit downwind of me, I'm not going to have a problem with you, but I might give you the side eye in judgment. Our CFO wrote back, ew. Same message. Right? But and I think at the same level of conversation, but worded differently. And so when I'm talking to finance, I have to remember they don't care about the context. And if you're going to give them the context first, you are torturing them. Tell them what they want, what you need for them to do first. If you want to add context later on in the email, that's great. I have literally written emails, short version, a sentence, longer version for context, blah, la, 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 la. Most of the time, that longer version does not get read, but it makes me happy to know that it's there, right? So it's this idea of adjusting your understanding of at what level people are meeting you, and adjusting so that you honor their levels as well.
Amazing as always, Donita. We've still got a couple minutes, but I'm guessing Jamie and Tara may want to do a little close. We were thinking as a checkout, we had a couple of questions we thought about, but we're thinking, based on an hour here together, are you inspired to go lead a conversation? Based on our time here tonight, are you inspired to go lead a conversation? Yes, no, maybe. Anybody have a reaction to that as closure?
I'm reacting to the word lead.
Mm.
Leading the conversation would be -1, right? In what sense am I leading a conversation? I think I think this gives me a good perspective of kind of just judging the communication as I'm in it. And it actually is going to change my perspective about conversations that I have, because I'll be thinking about these levels. And that actually is pretty cool, because you have lots of conversations all the time. So this is a great tool, I think, because it gives you a perspective. So I won't be leading the conversation. I'll just be noticing.
That really raises the issue of the Myers-Briggs personality type. What do you do if you're an introvert, right?
I'm an introvert.
I'm an introvert preference.
I talk a lot. I'm with you, Tia.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
I think so. Ever since I took the conversational leadership workshop, which I highly encourage everyone to attend, one of the things, and then also reading more, because of conversational leadership and the things that David Yertine has put out, reading Peter Block and that work about community, I very much shy away from calling myself a leader of anything. And the word I choose to use, though, is convener. So I don't ever, even though I know I'm, by some people's perceptions, leading a group, I say, and it's true, I convene groups. So it's not for me to, say, okay, everybody, this is what we're going to do today. It's like, okay, well, it's okay, everybody, here's space for us to get together, and whatever comes up, comes up. So I'm very comfortable with saying I'm a convener, and because I convene a lot of groups. But yeah, that's where I'm at. and I like to be, like Ivan was talking about, active listener and see what happens, and not necessarily guide the conversation, but make space for whatever comes up.
Oh, I like that.
Nice.
Making space.
Yeah, I think my takeaway is along those lines too. And being an introvert, I can say what an introvert might want to take away from this is the conversation with your teams is a really long engagement. So leading that conversation, and then really another thing I like is servant leadership. It's asking myself in every engagement or every opportunity to engage, what does the team need the most at our journey right now? And can I provide that in this touch point? A lot of times that'll be, maybe I can listen more and do the recap. Maybe I can bring the focus back to the thing that we're all thinking about while we're talking about our shiny objects, and get us to realize that, hey, we all have that in common. So maybe that's really our next push to do the best for all of us. But doing it over the long term is where the focus was really be. So lead a conversation. Yeah, I got a lot of ideas here that I want to try with the teams that I'm involved in. And I think as an introvert, where I'm not pushing out as much with those teams, the biggest thing I can do to reveal to them is to say, here's to show, not say, to show the thing that I'm doing a little bit differently, that's shown I've internalized something, and the purpose on that is for everybody else. So hopefully that'll be heard. And if it is, then the cycle will keep going.
Amazing.
Great comments. Oh, I'd like to say one more thing, that I've always viewed a knowledge manager as a cross between a concierge service and a therapist. And so what I don't hear in this conversation is that ultimately something has to get done, whether it's to market what we do or solve problems, or so, we need an end in sight from all these levels of conversation, or maybe not.
Well, it also, very valid. You do want to get things done. Before I forget, I did want to mention, has everybody heard of a book called The Art of Gathering? Priya Parker. She talks about the benign authority, because a lot of times people, they're not looking for a leader in this sort of dictatorial way, but they're looking for somebody to set context. I've made it a rule that if, thank you, Emily, that if I'm in a breakout room and nobody speaks up in the first 2 seconds, I will be that benign authority, rather than having those awkward, minute of everybody just looking at each other and sweating and, anyway, so I think that the part that I love, that I'm taking away, is that conversations have different shapes and different lengths, and they appear in different formats. John once asked me if you could have conversation with artwork, And the answer, I think, for me is absolutely yes, right? So honoring the different ways people show up in conversation is ultimately going to get you to that goal in a different and more holistic, kinder path. If we do it right, you know, or if we, there's no right way, but yeah.
Put effort into it. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
What was that
Tara,
author's
Jamie?
name again?
Sorry.
Priya Parker.
I'm sorry.
Here, I'll
Donita,
put
what
it in
was
the chat. I'll put it in chat.
It's called Art of Gathering. The other thing that's very related to this conversation that's in that book is they spend a whole chapter or two talking about the difference between hosting, convening, and facilitating, which I remember the first time I read it, I really appreciated. Wow, what is it that I do? Do I host? Do I convene? Do I facilitate? What is that?
And also, Victor, think about, you know, taking some of the burden off of yourself. If you've got an extrovert on the team, an extrovert preference, maybe that person could do some of the running of the meeting.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And you can sit back and listen actively.
Yes. All right, Jamie and Tara, back to you. Hope that was helpful.
Oh, thank you guys so much. I enjoyed that conversation. That was great. So thank you, John and Donita, for being here and sharing this with us for this hour. This has been fantastic. I hope you enjoyed yourself, even if you're really tired. And thank you for showing up. It's always good to have my good friend John Hovell, who got me started in knowledge management a long time ago. So I am indebted to him for that. So he's a real he impacts people. He does. So thank you very much, John, and thanks all of you for coming tonight. This is great. Please come again. Join the meetup. You'll get the notice. I don't think we have something scheduled for next month yet. Jamie,
I
do you
do.
know?
It's me. It's me. I'm terrified to put it on the schedule.
Do it. Do it.
It is talking about radical communityship next.
Okay.
next
Okay. Oh, great. Wonderful.
yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
everyone have a great night and stay safe and healthy and have fun with knowledge management.
Thank you,
Have
Donita.
Have a good
Thanks,
evening.
Thank you,
everybody.
Jamie.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Tara.
Everybody.
Nice
Go
to
out
meet
and have
you
great
all.
conversations.
Enjoy
Bye.
my